What shall we nerd out about today? Horses of courses, or rather half horses, centaurs, because mantors are just creepy. So if centaurs existed in real life, or let's say there's a fantasy world that puts a little bit more emphasis on realism and practicality and all that nonsense, what would be the most useful historical weapon? Yes, assault rifles, obviously. Because there's always someone who immediately says, guns. I mean, they did make assault rifles in the 1900s, so it is history in that sense. Same way as I am. I was also made in the 1900s. Doesn't necessarily make me part of history. I mean, kind of, but whatever. Everything up to now is history, but usually when we say historical, we mean medieval, stereotypically, let's face it. That's what most fantasy is based upon. Anyway, so what would be good weapons for centaurs? I mean, obviously we can just look at cavalry units in history and just be like, whatever works for cavalry works for centaurs. If we look at lancers, sure, centaurs could quite easily do that. In fact, even more effectively. Essentially everything cavalry can do, a centaur can do better because there is no disconnect between the rider and the horse. The rider is the horse, sort of. It's a more directly linked kinetic chain. Ideally, you link it as much as possible. That's why you have saddles and stirrups and all that to get as much of a connection to the horse as possible and transfer as much force as possible and not be thrown off the horse as easily, etc., etc. That's all obvious. If it's one unit, then that's even more efficient. But that's also where the problem comes. Outside of maneuvering and armoring the horse in the first place, unless the rider has a particularly long shield, there isn't a whole lot the knight can do to protect the horse. It's a little bit related to the problem I talked about that comes with being on the high ground. It's generally seen as the advantageous position, and there are plenty of good things about it, but the downside of that is your legs are awfully exposed because someone that you may not be able to reach or where you could only target the head, if anything, could quite easily target your legs and even do it while staying outside of your reach. While editing this, I noticed that I was focused a little too much on the potential downsides, and I definitely don't want to somehow end up arguing that cavalry was no good. So I decided to ask someone who has quite a bit of a hands-on experience, or I suppose butt-in-the-saddle experience, Jason Kingsley, who among other things runs the Modern History TV channel. He emphasized just how much a horse can carry, so a centaur could wear very heavy armor indeed and be hardly encumbered at all. And he had a fascinating idea, a large plow-type shield that the centaur holds in both hands for the initial charge, which can then be discarded. That sounds like the ultimate shock troop. Just imagine heavily armored centaurs with a wedge-shaped shield in front of them just plowing into your formation. Sounds devastating. I definitely like that idea. Thanks for chiming in, Jason. So heavy centaur cavalry would definitely work. But Jason also pointed out that because the human part of the centaur is located quite a bit more forward than a human rider, the rear and flanks would be even more vulnerable than usual. And here's a particular concern I have.
I've got quite a bit of hindquarters and forequarters to jab at as you go past mine.
Yeah, you have, haven't you? But I wonder whether, if we've got similar sized weapons, whether you're going to stab the horse and I'm going to stab you, whether that's fair exchange.
Definitely a good point that unless the infantryman has a longer reaching polearm, it would be dangerous to target the horse. But of course, you're not targeting the horse, you're targeting the centaur. If a knight crashes when the horse goes down, the rider can be injured in the fall, or the horse can fall on the rider and injure him that way, or suffocate him, or there's a lot of things that can go wrong in that way, of course. But there's a chance that the rider might be able to pick himself up and continue fighting and may survive. If those are your legs, that's kind of a problem. And of course, there are plenty of other dangers on the battlefield, like a forecast of spiky rain, aka arrows, that sure threaten the rider as well, but the horse is a larger target. As a centaur, you have an awfully large hitbox, so to speak. There are plenty of fleshy bits to be damaged. Unless, once again, you cover yourself completely in armor. As a centaur, the biggest chunk of your hitbox is not semi-disposable and replaceable the way a knight's horse is. So it's a bit of a problem, in my opinion. Sure, there are some good options for melee. A mace, for example, or a horseman's flail or hammer, etc., would be devastating. Just imagine. I mean, the kind of power that can be generated by swinging this as you pass a target, in full gallop, and you really lay into them, and you don't even have to worry about the weapon getting stuck so much. I mean, it could happen momentarily, but much less likely than with a blade. So a centaur could make great use of that, no doubt. But I think there are better options, smarter options, shall we say, and less risky. When looking through history for particularly effective and fairly low-risk mounted units, horse archers stand out. Immensely successful, the Huns, the Mongols, the Chinese and Japanese use them effectively, etc. There are plenty of instances of mounted archers being deadly and hard to pin down due to their highly effective hit and run tactic. So if you imagine centaurs with bows, that'll work quite nicely. And they can carry quite a lot of ammunition too. I mean, they can have a bunch of quivers on their backs. The horseback, their second backs, whatever. And while traditionally horse archers were able to develop immensely impressive skills on horseback, riding the horse without holding onto reins or anything, just operating the bow and developing a remarkable degree of accuracy, all that is even easier for a centaur. Because once again, this is one unit. I mean, steppe nomads basically grow up in the saddle, so they are highly connected to the horse. Again, this is an enormous level of skill. But still, if it's the same organism, that's still always going to be just slightly more efficient. So all the same advantages apply. Hit and run tactics are exceptionally powerful. Speaking of power, you also add the velocity of the galloping horse, or in this case centaur, to the velocity of the arrow, at least if you're shooting in that direction. If you're shooting behind you and you're technically subtracting from it. But here's something even more interesting that personally I've never seen anywhere. Centaurs with atlatls. Now, you do sometimes see centaurs throw spears or javelins, but atlatls I have not seen so far. And that would make a lot of sense because you already have an advantage by moving fast, and now this adds a mechanical advantage. So this increases the power, and throwing in line with the gallop would make it even more effective. Because you have that extra storage on your butt, basically, you could carry a whole lot of darts. And unlike a bow, in an emergency, you even have a melee weapon that would be reasonably effective. Riding past someone and hitting them with essentially a club would definitely be more effective than doing that with a bow, especially if the bow is still strung. I'd love to see some kind of spring-loaded quiver that's strapped to the flank of the centaur that pushes up the next dart whenever one is removed. Because I imagine for the human part, for that body, it would be kind of hard to reach that low. So it would be more convenient to just have a stack that gets pushed up so you can grab them more quickly and then, put the next one on the Atlatl and toss it. I find this pretty intriguing to imagine because that's a combination we haven't seen in history. Whenever and wherever mounted warfare was developed, Atlatls had either fallen out of favor long ago and were replaced by bows, or were never used to begin with, at least as far as we know. So that's interesting to imagine. You could combine an Atlatl or a bow or something with a sling, because the sling is so small, it just rolls up and you can stick it in a pocket. You just need a pouch with ammo, be it lead balls or rocks or something. Natural ammunition would be less available to a centaur compared to a human who can just crouch down and pick up rocks. For a centaur, that would be a little slower and more awkward. So yeah, spear chucking centaur sounds pretty good to me. It would be effective and pretty safe, would lend itself well to hit and run again, and yeah, would be kind of stylish. Other things are conceivable as well. If crossbows, for example, depending on how exactly. If you have a crossbow with a goat's foot lever, span it fairly easily. So you would have limited draw weight. It would be a little bit weaker overall, or some sort of belly or chest supported crossbow that you can just place against your body and pull with both arms. Again, not as powerful as it could be because the draw weight is not going to be quite as high as, say, a windlass span crossbow, and it's going to have a shorter draw than a bow. So there are some downsides there. I think a bow would probably work better for centaurs overall. And yes, guns, of course. Anyway, hope you found this entertaining. Thanks for watching and take care, folks. Keep horsing around.